Conversation with Steven Nerayoff. He is a prolific investor and advisor in blockchain and really created the legal structure that still stands today when it comes to tokenization, and that's certainly how he helped fuel, you could say, Ethereum to where we see it today. And now, as chairman of CasperLabs, how are you thinking about the evolution on top of the revolution that we saw in 2008? So welcome, Steve. How
Thank
are
you.
we seeing this?
When Bitcoin kind of exploded onto the scene, that was a paradigm shift. It was a revolutionary new technologies. I can interact with you. In that case, they were sending value, what we call Bitcoin today, and we didn't need a third party in the middle. Like, that is a radical concept, really, in human history. We've never actually been able to do that, and I can trust you because of the way the technology is operating. And so now we're seeing many iterations of that. So we're seeing a whole economy happening in terms of tokenizing, and they're called utility tokens, but it's a whole new economy and things that we haven't seen before. And then on the other side, you're just kind of seeing like Wall Street 2.0 with security tokens, and it's the same underlying technology. And I like to say that they have the same grandfather in Satoshi with Bitcoin, but the grandchildren are kind of going their own way. And they both arguably are forming the largest markets ever known to mankind.
Well, you're almost creating an economy, though, some would argue, without actually having the proof case or the utility case. And so there are a lot of teams and a lot of talent in the space right now that are trying to figure out the efficiencies or even enterprise solutions. But that mass adoption, that moment in time when the average person says, yeah, I get it, I'm going to use my crypto asset, and I'm going to get something of value in return.
Yeah, so what we haven't seen yet is we haven't had that, for the internet, it was the Netscape moment. Netscape hit, you looked at it, the internet was always there, it had been there, but all of a sudden you saw pictures, and it was a visual experience, and that kind of changed the whole thing. That was the day the commercial internet was born. And then it went from thousands of people to millions of people to billions of people in pretty quick order. And I think the same thing's going to happen here. So in 2009, 10, it was a very small number, very small community. You're starting it to grow. And what we haven't had, and it's only been 10 years, remember the internet started as the ARPANET in the 60s, and then it didn't actually have the commercialization until 1994. So it's 30 years. We've only 10 years into this. I think it's going to go a lot faster, but what we haven't had is that killer app. And we haven't had our Netscape. I think one of the reasons we haven't had it is because we haven't had a protocol, so a blockchain, that is what they call the holy grail. Mm-hmm. So there's three aspects to a blockchain. One is security, it has to be fully secure. The other one is decentralization, it has to be fully decentralized. And the other one is that it should scale quickly. So you do a lot of transactions per second. And the ones that have happened, so you see like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're super secure. They are totally decentralized, or they just haven't been able to scale a lot. They weren't really intended to from the beginning. And Bitcoin's case, they don't want it to scale anymore. They're saying it's fine.
When you say scale, does this mean transactions?
Sorry. So scalability, right, is the ability to do a lot of transactions per second. So if you look at, let's say, the Visa MasterCard network, that typically does about 1,000 to 2,000 transactions per second on average, right? And so if you can't do that, bottlenecks start clogging. And so you will do you could charge your Visa card, and you could be sitting there, paying for your dinner for another week.
Well, I can't imagine standing there and waiting for that transaction to happen.
And if you had Visa, MasterCard, and credit cards, would have never taken off. And so the ability for a transaction to happen fast is absolutely essential for a new technology to be adopted by everyday people. They need to have that convenience and speed. Otherwise, it won't work.
All right, we often talk about proof of work as a technology, right? That confirmation that allows that consensus to happen very quickly. Bitcoin is very slow, right? And then Ethereum is slightly faster, but there are new protocols that are being birthed every day.
Right,
the grandchildren are populating the
right.
earth, but new protocols. So what is CasperLabs doing?
CasperLabs is doing something different. Rather than using mining equipment to generate random numbers and use that as a consensus. What we're doing is what's called proof of stake. And you buy the tokens and you stake the tokens, and through that process with a lot less computing power and different types of less expensive computers, you can actually do the same amount of consensus. What that allows you to do then is move many more transactions per second and potentially keep the same security. So that's super important. You have to have a secure network. So this evolution, this is an evolution in the proof of stake, has been super important. The problem has been that everybody who's implemented this has had some form of centralization. What that means in practical terms is when you have centralization, that means that there could be potential malicious action. That means a third party or a hacker could potentially do something, and let's say, for example, you did a transaction last week, I sent $1,000 to somebody else could potentially reverse that transaction and maybe have the money sent to them. So this is obviously a very important thing when we're talking about...
Because nobody has actually proven proof of stake yet.
No, it hasn't. Well, nobody has come out with proof of stake, they've shown it to work, but nobody's had a fully decentralized proof of stake. They've always had some element of centralization in order to make it move fast. So you can do a lot of transactions per second, so you could serve a lot of people globally. And the exciting thing about CasperLabs and why so many of us came together, and a lot of industry folks that have been around for a long time, is because a really prominent Ethereum researcher, probably the most prominent one, is Vlad Zamfir. And what Vlad came up with was, in my opinion, as big of an invention as what happened 10 years ago with Satoshi, and the equally impressive one that happened with Vitalik and Ethereum, and basically adding intelligence, more or less, to Satoshi's invention. And Vlad figured out a way to actually scale those inventions. And so you've got this beautiful, 10 years ago, 5 years ago now, where you have this invention, and now we actually have the ability to scale. That's really important because the companies that are coming on to the blockchains right now, they're not building for thousands of transactions like Visa or MasterCard for something that can actually go global, service billions of people, like a Facebook or a Google. They're building something that only can do maybe 10 or 20 or 30 transactions per second, just serving a very small group. And most of those projects tends to be like concept or trials or small things that companies are doing. They're actually not thinking in terms of when they service the whole world.
Yes.
So if you imagine Facebook would create a little proof of concept instead of the full Facebook for everybody, they can only service, maybe a town. Right? It wouldn't be very interesting, and by definition, you wouldn't have something like a Netscape or Facebook that would go to billions of people.
And so, what are the adoption cases that you can envision with really primary use cases for what's coming out of CasperLabs?
Well, the great thing about this is with decentralization, it's a new way of thinking. So it's not just saying we're going to take e-commerce and put it on the blockchain, right? I mean, yes, there will be some of that, right? But it's a lot more than saying a decentralized Facebook or a decentralized eBay. There's new models that we would have never even thought about.
Like?
Well, I mean, if you think about it by way of analogy, you can think like the internet plus GPS gave birth to Uber. We would have never thought about an Uber or an Airbnb. We would have never thought about these things before, those technologies coming together. I think what you're going to see here is also similar. We're going to see blockchain combined with things like artificial intelligence, or blockchain compared with things like Internet of Things. Internet of Things, for example, is projected to be a $17 trillion economy.
Yeah.
That's about the size of the U.S. economy, and some of the U.S. and China. That's how massive it is.
How does the average user, the average person, factor into this economy, this new economy?
So the average user is going to have the wonderful benefit that they had with the internet, but much, much greater, because their lives are going to be absolutely improved by this.
Like?
But the fact that you and I can interact with each other without intermediaries, that opens up a whole new world, right? So now, the early use cases that you're seeing is like remittance. I have somebody in a third world country and I want to send money back to my third world country. I went to a first world country. Now, it was very difficult for me to do that. And remittance was, there was a barrier in the banking industry that just had
There's a lot of friction and a third party
friction.
and, of course, a lot of financial fees. that are
Right.
attached.
Absolutely.
Transaction fees.
And you're seeing it's actually life and death in some cases. You're seeing
Absolutely.
Venezuela during this crisis that they're having, Bitcoin usage is a soared through the roof because for the first time I can walk out across the border with all of my assets and not have nothing in my hands. All of my assets, and there's nobody that can touch those. I can keep them in Bitcoin, and when I move, I just have to have my information to be able to access that, which nobody else has, and then I can access it after I'm over the border. This is revolutionary. Right? This
Do you
has
have
never
a
happened
test
before.
net?
I'm sorry?
The test net
Yes.
and mainnet
Mainnet will be up this year.
up this year?
Yes.
And a lot of people are wondering about a roadmap. What does that strategy look like?
So the roadmap will be focusing on mass adoption. Right, so we've spent a lot of years here building out this technology, thinking about the different things it could do, and now our goal is to get this out to the world. We want to serve billions of people, not millions and not hundreds of millions, like literally the whole world. And eventually, if you know, like the internet, TCP/IP is the protocol that everybody agreed upon. It's servicing 7 or 8 billion people, however many are actually on it, but everybody can go on it. Right now we don't have that, so we're hoping to give that gift to the world. And it's important to note, it's an open source project. Once we've developed the mainnet and we launch it, basically send it out into the wild. You know, it's humanity's gift at this point. We will be a contributor to it at that point, but we don't own it. So
All right,
it's really
well, we've talked to a lot of protocols, and some are talking about the open source and the need for public blockchain. What we're also seeing are people like Hedera Hashgraph, right? And thinking that, you know, to be open source truly is to also potentially open up for dilution of talent or even undermining the very ethos, which sounds almost ironic, right? But to at least place some sense of control so that it moves forward rather than forking and you know diluting and teams are separating. What's your sense of that?
This is why people blockchain is so amazing. Is because open source. It's a great. I think the best example ever of open source. You could look like a company like Microsoft. So Microsoft was the epitome of proprietary, closed source, license. We control the market. We're monopolistic. And they bring a new CEO, and in a couple of years, he's completely changed the culture. He's now saying we're shipping things out. It's open sourcing everything, and we're just going to be a contributor to that ecosystem. What you realize by doing this, human nature, I don't know if it's human nature, but the way we've been trained is probably a better way of putting it, has been that if I own it, I'm going to make a lot more money because of percentage-wise. But what we're realizing is, actually, if we send it out and humanity owns it, but I have a piece of that, I'm going to have 1,000 times bigger pie. So I may only need 2% of that to get a way bigger percentage than I would have had. So actually you're seeing for-profit public companies doing this as a smart strategy for their shareholders. And it's also a smart strategy for development because you're getting developers that are passionate. You can't possibly hire all of these people from all around the world. So you're going to get the best minds because they'll be attracted to it, and there's an easy way for them to just come into it. So it's really, you know, the gift of open source. Blockchain has just really grabbed onto because Satoshi used it as an open source project himself, and it is bringing about a lot of these amazing changes.
As a lawyer, you think about structure, you think about the structure of economies, the structure of deals. How about the structure of where we are today with blockchain? Went from ICO, now we're talking about STO.
Yeah, so the ICO was it was a huge important development, right? So what that showed was that capital flow to where it was desired to go. With a community of maybe it's only 40 or 50 million people globally, it was actually very small percentage-wise. You could see a rush of like tens of millions of dollars to going into a project, and people chose to. Now, to be fair, a lot of these projects did abuse the process, so I'm not condoning that. What I'm trying to get is, let's go underneath that for a second. What it showed was that collectively, independent people all around the world could look at a project, open source project, and decide, I want to support that project and send resources to that project. So not just computing resources, but physical, monetary resources to that project in the form of cryptocurrency. And there's a whole economy being built around that. Similarly, that technology has given birth to something called security tokens. And you know, one project that I worked on is called T0, and they were kind of like the first ones to start building this out. So Patrick Byrne from Overstock is really visionary in this space. And what that is, that's really Wall Street 2.0. These are showing that we take a token, and by changing digital, which is just digits on a screen. We have something that's actually programmable. It means it's kind of a weird concept to understand, but I mean your stock or your bonds are programmable. Well, this is actually a really big deal because let's say a government's issuing bonds. Well, there's schedules, there's payment schedules, and early fees, and all kinds of different things that they have to do in structuring that. That all can be taken care of with a smart contract. So it's lowering the barriers, lowering the cost, and it's making the capital move flow quickly. So now what you'll see is low-cost markets with capital flow that's going globally. So a transaction can happen in China, in the US, in South America, and amongst each others, and it's super important, it's peer-to-peer. So it's not going through some settlement layer. So I'm dealing directly, and it's settling. If you're selling me something, we're directly settling with each other through the use of the blockchain. And only the blockchain could have done that, but again, because you don't need an intermediary. You will. There's absolutely a place for banks and everything in here. In fact, their role is going to get even bigger in terms because one of the other things is bringing is the tokenization of real assets. And now we're taking things like, let's just take this building that we're in right now. There is about $250 billion, no, trillion, excuse me, $250 trillion worth of physical real estate in the world that is illiquid. That right now, this is the first technology that allows us to now cause that to be liquid. And people can invest in those assets. We could create a token for an individual building. We can create a token for a restaurant inside of a hotel. You can get really specific. You have microeconomies. I can have a token, not necessarily from Apple, the enterprise, but let's say I just want to invest in the red new iPhone 10, that particular model. I think that model is going to do well. Apple could actually very easily spin off a token that directly tracks the revenue stream off of that one phone model. Now this is like super important because now investors can get very particular in terms of what they want, and they can refine their choices. It also opens up investment to billions of people that don't have it right now. So I can invest, let's say I have a local coffee shop, and I don't have enough money to really invest in a large public company. I want to put $50 into a local coffee shop. That coffee shop can now go public because the barriers and what we even think of as a public company is actually changing. So I envision a world in the not too distant future where instead of having a couple tens of thousands of public companies, we could have a couple million public companies. And so, but your definition of a public
But
company
then who
changes.
takes care of investor relation? Who takes care of the fiduciary responsibility that one business or entity has to the millions of, online or virtual investors that are probably anonymous?
Yeah, well, not necessarily anonymous, right?
Sure,
So you
sure.
can absolutely have exchange of information, but it changes the role of the company and the investor. Because now so you have the utility tokens that we were seeing in the ICOs, and you have the security tokens. These two can come together. So you could have a token that says, I want to have part of your revenue stream, what we normally think of like a stock. But at the same time, that token could say, well, if I have 1,000 of these tokens, then I get a certain discount on your product. Or I'm getting a certain type of benefit that's not available to anybody else if I have 10,000 of these. Right? So I just walk up, show you my wallet, and now all of a sudden your customer relations department and your investor relations department kind of start colliding with each other. And you're thinking about how you're interacting, and instead of saying shareholder, customer, maybe you start thinking of stakeholder. And they're all kind of in the same pool, they start melding with each other. So now as a business you can start looking at your supply chain and say, maybe I want my suppliers to become investors in my business, and I'm going to give them a benefit in my relationship with them when they buy from me, the more they're investing in the business. Now there's great synergies here. So companies can get super creative and make their ecosystem more cohesive and connect to other ecosystems.
What's the appetite from the regulatory space in the US when it comes to STOs?
So I think the regulators are taking a very cautioned approach. They're seeing this, I think they are starting to understand the ramifications here. And to be fair, it's not a simple task for them. In the US we have a couple of acts the SEC is under. And they are now, it's really a round peg square hole issue. They never envisioned, they were in 1933, 1934, nobody back then, they were just they probably just got used to electricity, I mean, more or less. But now they're thinking about tokens and this new economy and something that can change, and it does one thing for one person, like I said before, and a different thing in a different context. How do you regulate that? So it's a difficult situation. I think what they need to do is they need to come up with new rules.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, they're trying to walk a very fine line by protecting investors, because that's their main job, is to protect investors. Second time, allow innovation to occur. It's incumbent upon them, though, to move with speed, because what's happening is you're seeing that the U.S. is being a roadblock to international expansion. And a lot of people are, when the ICOs were happening, the U.S. came down hard, and I think in many cases it was certainly warranted. So I'm not, but it showed there's a negative aspect to that. What it showed is that it stopped it globally.
Yeah.
And maybe you would have wanted that particular issue to stop. That's not really the issue, is that it's also stopping development of the technology for Wall Street 2.0, for example, and in other areas, because you want to stop it here, but then you want to fix it in a way that allows the technology to proliferate while still protecting people. And they haven't taken that second step yet. But to be fair, we're still in the middle of this process. So I think they're moving. Other countries are moving much faster.
Yes.
And you're seeing countries like Malta and other countries in Asia and even some South American countries moving much more rapidly with their Zug. And Switzerland is another great example. Estonia. So these countries are popping out. Some are established countries like Switzerland, some are less established. And what you're seeing is innovations flowing there. You're seeing in the U.S., we're seeing entrepreneurs leaving to go to those countries and set up operations over there, and you're seeing those economies starting to flourish, and innovation is starting to happen. So I think they're certainly on the forefront, and there's if they continue to stay at the forefront, they will birth entire new economies. If you go to Zug in Switzerland, you'll see it's called Crypto Valley, and there's like a ridiculous number of blockchain companies there. Some are billion-plus companies that didn't even exist. And in many ways, Switzerland is hundreds of thousands, or whatever it is, years old in terms of the banking industry, and that was their mainstay. And now they're like, this is whole new technology play. They really weren't involved in technology before. And this technology play is really super important to them, because it brings not only technology, but it's also Wall Street 2.0 to them.
Yeah.
And so I think countries like the United States and other established countries, certainly China, Japan, need to take notice of that.
You're a structure guy at the end of the day. How do you apply that structural thinking about building foundation, thinking about building infrastructure for something that is completely decentralized?
Yeah, so your thinking needs to change in terms of how you are applying it. What you need to start thinking about is, how does this serve an ecosystem, right? So it's not this party or that party. How do these rules apply to an ecosystem? And it's a different way of thinking. Certainly we're talking about blockchain governance. How do you manage disputes in a blockchain? If I have a smart contract and we have a dispute in our smart contract and it executes and I disagree with the way it executes, how do you solve that, right?
How do you solve that?
There's no simple answer. What you need to do, there's a big debate right now. And part of the debate is, do you just let it autonomously go and say, this is the way it's going to be and that's it? Or do you allow participants to make changes to the blockchain over time and how it governs each other? In fact, in our case, our chief architect, Vlad Zamfir, who came up with CBC Casper, he's also been a big proponent on the legal side for this way of thinking about blockchain governance. And these two camps there. There's some validity, there's one camp in terms of not changing things, and that's more the Bitcoin, and that's just value transfer. But that argument breaks down a lot when you're talking about people interacting with each other, and then having to deal with it in the physical world.
Yeah.
Because we don't actually live on the blockchain. At the end of the day, we're living on soil,
right?
And so it has to be brought back here, because we have real courts here. We have real buildings here. There's real people here, and sometimes that gets lost. And so you can say we trust the code all we want, but at the same time, the judge with his gavel doesn't have to say that either. And if he makes it illegal, that's a problem. So we have to, think these things through. And this is, as much as the technology is starting to take hold, you have to remember this is affecting all other aspects of society. The legal system is one area that it's affecting, and they haven't even started getting their hands around it. There's cases haven't even made it to the trial, let alone appellate. My guess is it's probably another 10 years before we start seeing real clarification in that area.
Well, 10 years is like centuries in blockchain, but it has been such a pleasure. This has gone by in a flash.
Thank
and
you.
I've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.